Speedrunning has exploded in popularity over the last few years, with the explosion of Twitch.tv just accelerating that popularity even farther. And the beauty of it is that you can speedrun pretty much anything. So even if you're not typically into speedruns, you can probably find a game that you're interested in being ran by someone somewhere. But despite how different some speed games are from others, most speedruns are united by one thing. Something that basically all of them have in common, and that's Jank. People clipping through walls, doing precise inputs that somehow teleport you to the end of the game, people breaking apart and modifying their controllers to allow them to do unique tech. I mean, people even use hot plates to heat up their old consoles to make certain glitches easier to reproduce. Not every speed game has all that much jank. Some game speedruns are pretty honest, or some games have so many reproducible glitches that people choose not to use them because it's not very fun to do. But today, I wanted to look at my personal 3 favourite pieces of speedrun tech that allow people to jank their way through games faster than anybody else can. Of course, some of the very greatest examples of crazy jank comes from the Source engine, but before I actually get to the jank I want to talk about, let's do a quick history lesson. Back in the ancient world of 1998, Valve released Half-Life 1. It's a critically acclaimed masterpiece and all, but it also had all sorts of turbo jank that speedrunners very quickly started abusing. Most notably for speedrunning was bunny hopping. To cut a complicated explanation down to a short one, you actually move faster and accelerate when you strafe in Source games. And when you're in the air, you can gain speed infinitely, so long as you don't touch the ground, and so long as you only use your strafe keys. And this still works in modern Source games, which is what allows for things like surfing to work in games like Counter-Strike. But people very rapidly figured out that if you jumped the instant you hit the ground, you're not actually touching the ground for long enough for the game to actually slow you down at all. So the game essentially treats you like you're permanently airborne. So long as you only touch the ground for a few frames at a time, the amount of speed you lose when you do touch the ground is basically zero. So that allowed you to infinitely gain speed by jumping the moment you hit the ground and just using your strafe keys to turn left and right to gain speed, which is what allows people to go at incredibly high speeds down the steel corridors of Black Mesa in Half-Life 1. But when Valve released Half-Life 2, they decided that they didn't really like the idea of Gordon Freeman flying at the speed of sound all over the place. So they put in a fix that completely prevented players from gaining infinite speed with their bunny hops. Their solution was fairly simple. If a player was trying to bunny hop, the game would add negative speed to the player to prevent them from gaining increased speed. But as you can imagine, a solution that is this overly simple is usually really easy to just break. Turns out, if you just jumped, crouched, and went backwards instead of forwards, the game would think you were trying to bunny hop, and it would give you negative speed. And that negative speed makes you just accelerate backwards instead of forwards. And you accelerate really fast. And you gain speed much faster than bunny hopping ever allowed you to. So instead of Gordon Freeman travelling at the speed of sound down steel corridors, he instead travels at light speed across the sky throughout the entirety of the game. This also works in Portal 1, by the way, but the tight spaces of Aperture Science make for much less exciting uses of it for the most part, although it is obviously still used in Portal 1 speedruns. This movement tech made Half-Life 2 speedruns absolutely insane to watch, cutting about 3 hours of runtime into just 43 minutes. In future Source games, the solution to bunny hopping varies from game to game, but it ends up actually working instead of, making this happen. For example, Portal 2 allows you to bunny hop faster than you move normally, but if you start going above a certain speed, the game locks you out of turning left and right, preventing you from gaining any extra speed. But for just a few of their titles, Valve broke their game's movement wide open, wider than any other game that they'd ever made previously or since. And speaking of moving through the world, arse first, really fast, the most popular speed game of all time, Super Mario 64, has its very own arse first movement tech. Backwards long jumps, or BLJs for short, allow you to gain massive amounts of speed, going so fast that you can clip through walls and doors to get to areas early. Backwards long jumps might just be the most famous speedrun tech ever, so you probably don't need me telling you what it is or what it looks like, but most people probably don't know how it works. But funnily enough, the reason BLJs work is very similar to the reason that accelerated backhopping works in Half-Life. When Mario does a long jump, he leaps forward and gains a burst of forward speed. But if you're going upstairs, you can actually do many long jumps without really leaving the ground at all. You can do long jumps on stairs basically as fast as you can mash the jump button. But unfortunately, Mario has a hard speed cap that he cannot exceed under any circumstances. However, there is absolutely no speed cap on Mario's negative speed value. Ah, see, it sounds familiar, doesn't it? You know, the fact that Nintendo made this exact mistake 8 years before Half-Life 2 even released makes it really a bit shocking that Valve let this slip through the cracks, doesn't it? So now all you have to do is long jump backwards and mash jump up a set of stairs, and you can clip through any wall or clip past any never-ending staircase that your heart could possibly desire. And this gets used very frequently in runs, most notably in 16-star runs. BLJs allow runners to skip certain doors and barriers that usually don't allow access without a certain number of stars acquired. Although TAS runs, tool-assisted speedruns, use BLJs in some completely ridiculous ways to do things that no human could possibly do. Apparently speedrunners are quite big fans of going backwards through everything. I mean, they even do it in Ocarina of Time, apparently. Mario Kart Wii had a great feature that made the speedrun scene for the game much larger than any Mario Kart game that had come before it. The game allowed you to upload your time trials to leaderboards, and allowed other players to view or race against your ghost. And this made the speedrunning community for the game explode immediately on release, because it made viewing other people's strats and comparing yourself to other people extremely easy. And a few months after the game released, somebody discovered something really strange on the track Grumble Volcano. If you did lap 1 normally, you could line yourself up with these rocks and use a mushroom to jump onto them. After landing up here, for a reason that was yet to be discovered, driving around these rocks worked as a sort of miniature version of the track. Doing a lap of this rock formation would count as doing a lap of the entire track. People figured out ways to get on these rocks the moment the race started, and eventually the times on this track were under 20 seconds. But it was extremely poorly understood at first. You had to drive around the rocks in just the right way for a lap to count. If you drove too close to the left wall, it didn't count. If you didn't cross over the part of the rock next to the finish line, it didn't count either, and nobody really understood why. But before anyone had even begun to understand it, just 3 weeks after the first was found, another track had been completely destroyed by the same glitch. Mushroom Gorge allowed you to start a race, drive onto this mushroom trampoline, carry your momentum up the side of this mountain, land behind the finish line, and then cross the finish line to complete a lap. So now, after a second instance of a map being broken in the same way was discovered, the trick started to get their new nickname that would stick for the foreseeable future: ultra shortcuts. And people started looking into why these ultra shortcuts were even possible in the first place, in the hopes of finding more bugs just like it with the knowledge that they found. And in their testing, they figured out something a little bit strange. Mario Kart Wii uses a checkpoint system to make sure that players were driving laps normally and not just doing huge shortcuts. And they look something like this. The checkpoints in blue are just where you respawn if you fall off the map, so we can ignore those. These checkpoints in red are called key checkpoints. The player has to drive over them to complete a lap during normal gameplay. And the purple one is the start line. Players found that the game didn't actually track if you'd crossed through all of these checkpoints. It only made sure that you had crossed the key checkpoint right behind the finish line to give you the lap. So you might be thinking, well, couldn't you just drive backwards to this checkpoint and then forwards to the finish line to get a lap? Well, no. If you cross the finish line backwards, the game subtracts a lap from you behind the scenes, so that when you crossed the finish line again, you would still have the same number of laps. But the game was only doing this if you went from this purple box into the box immediately behind it. If you managed to avoid this box completely, you could theoretically go from the start straight to the final key checkpoint and then complete a lap. And this is exactly how these tricks were working. The reason driving around these rocks was so precise was because you needed to hit these checkpoints as you went around. So now that these tricks were better understood, players started finding them in all sorts of other maps throughout the game. And it gave Mario Kart Wii some of the spiciest jank in any Mario Kart game. This sort of stuff is the bread and butter of speedrunning. And a lot of the most popular speed games are that popular because of the crazy jank that can be pulled off. The games that are popular without the jank end up being games that were designed with intentional movement tech in mind. Games like Celeste, where almost all of the movement tech in the game is placed there by design. But most games aren't like Celeste. Most games' movement tech comes from the jankiest places imaginable. And in most cases, the jank is the reason the people like to speedrun the game in the first place. Thanks for watching.